TREV Alberts has spoken. The Nebraska athletic director has some thoughts on future realignment and really the future of college sports as a whole. Is it all going to go down as he suggests? I'm not so sure.
From LA to Piscataway, all Big Ten all year long. This is Big Ten 10.
Boy, there's a lot of honesty here, and I really appreciate that out of TREV Alberts. That's what we need, I feel like. You can't sugarcoat things the way college athletics is going. We need to have honest discussions, and that's exactly what happened in Sunday's Lincoln Journal-Star column by Amy Just, an interview with TREV Alberts. There's a lot of information to really divulge into this. There's a lot of information to break down. I'm going to really break it down into two sections. TREV Alberts' thoughts on realignment, and then really the future of college sports. They go hand in hand. Is it going to go down as he suggests? Because what he's suggesting has been suggested by a couple other people as well, but it kind of goes in a different direction than what we are going right now in college athletics here right now. Let's focus first on realignment here, what he said. And this is kind of two quotes, but I'm going to kind of combine it into kind of one idea. First, quote, "History is unkind to conferences that have not had the courage to expand." He continued to say, "I don't believe it's done. It's never been done. It's more likely than not that there will be continued periods of angst. I believe that the next go-round, that's my basic conclusion, will be far more disruptive than anything we're currently engaged in. We need to prepare ourselves mentally for that." Okay, there's a couple of different things to break down here. First, I want to talk really about realignment as a whole, that first quote, where history does not look kindly upon those that haven't expanded. Looking at you, Pac-12, look what's happened. Now, I know there was some politics within the Pac-12, of course, USC not wanting to expand. Maybe they had their one foot out the door at that time on their way to greener pastures in our beloved Big Ten at the time. Look what's happening at the ACC right now. They're trying to expand. They're trying to go to the other coast, not the Atlantic coast, but they're trying to go to the Pacific coast to expand. With Stanford and Cal, some of the schools aren't having it because some of the schools aren't exactly. It's kind of like USC and the Pac-12 all over again, kind of what's going over there in the ACC right now. This is where I appreciate the Big Ten in staying ahead of the curve kind of over the years, starting, of course, with Jim Delaney. Of course, the Big Ten expanding in the early 90s, getting Penn State to come in. You look at Nebraska and then Rutgers and Maryland. Now, I know those moves haven't been the most popular amongst people, but they were done for a reason, to get cable boxes, cable subscriptions, Big Ten Network into that area, New York City and all that. I know the model has kind of changed since then, but the Big Ten has kept up. They have stayed ahead of the curve in terms of expansion over the years, and it's a kill or be killed world out there. And I like how the Big Ten over the years has been able to stay kind of above the curve. TREV Alberts also touches in this article about how big of a deal television has really played over the years, and that's where I really like with the Big Ten. Not only have they stayed ahead of the curve in terms of expansion, but we know expansion is a lot due to what is happening on the television side of things. Not only on their national package, but of course the conference television package. We know what happened with the Big 12 kind of through their trials and tribulations throughout the years. Of course, they've gotten it together. They're doing just fine right now, but the conference network was kind of at the center of that. When you look at the Big Ten, they are the pioneers. Jim Delaney is the pioneer of the conference television network. What's been happening, what has happened with the Big Ten network, I think has allowed the Big Ten to really stay really ahead of the curve kind of over the years, and I really appreciate what has happened. It's all about being one step ahead, two steps ahead. Is Tony Petitti in that ball game right now? I believe he is. I think we got a good guy in office right now to kind of further the Big Ten going forward. Look, you might not be a fan of it, but you need a guy in that office no matter what conference you're in. You need a guy in that commissioner's office. Look at our friends in the Big 12 and Pac-12. That tells you what difference a commissioner can really make in terms of really keeping your conference alive going forward. Far more disruptive. He talked about that in terms of realignment. I think that kind of goes into what I'm going to be talking about in terms of the future of college sports in really the second segment of this, but we're looking at you, ACC. We know the Big Ten wants to go shopping down in the Southeast. We know the Big Ten wants to dip their toe, their knee, their leg, their body into the Southeast and really get the Florida States, the Clemsons, the Miamis of the world. It's more disruptive, I think Trev is using that terminology because it could possibly tear apart another conference, right? And you look at just how much, as this continues to really keep going down the line and down the line, it just keeps on disrupting more and more and more, whether you're talking about scheduling, whether you're talking about rivalries, no matter what you're talking about, I think it's a lot of people can agree this is disruptive. Now, disruptors, sometimes history looks favorable on the disruptors, right? We talked about history in terms of conference realignment, what Trev said. So that can kind of go a couple of different ways as of right there. So realignment, kill or be killed. That's got to be the mindset. I think Brett Yormark with our friends in the Big 12 kind of had that mindset as well. The Big 10 as well, taking ownership of the West Coast. Did they kill the pack? Maybe. Some people say yes. Some people say no. But you got to get those pieces and you got to keep on stepping up. You got to keep on evolving in today's day and age of conference realignment. All right, let's go on to the next set of quotes. And I think this one is actually a little bit more interesting. There's a lot of text on the screen, but let's read it and we'll get this all sorted out here. We're moving to a 35 to 40 top brands being a part of something. If you just look at football in isolation, eventually conferences will matter less in a sense. If we find a way to take football and have that be this entity here, I think then you can get back to doing some much more intelligent thinking around the rest of sports, which should be all regionally based. All of these moves are driven by one sport. That's football. And the football schedule is much different than a tennis schedule or a golf schedule. So these Olympic sports, the travel looks a little bit different. We're not really there today, but I think in the next 10 years, that reality makes a lot more sense. Okay, Trev, let's talk about this. Let's talk about this Trevy boy. I don't disagree with Trev, what he's saying here. But what he's suggesting is kind of going in a completely different direction than what we're doing right now. I believe Chip Kelly had kind of suggested this as well. Why don't we just make football, everybody's an independent, right? Notre Dame's an independent. We've been talking about that for years and years and years. Why don't we just make everybody an independent? In Trev's case, he talks about the top 35 to 40 brands. I think if this were to happen, it'd be more maybe high 50s going into the 60s in terms of those top brands kind of splitting apart. But why don't we just make football its own entity over here? And then the Olympic sports just are more regionally based as well. Well, that really goes away from what we're doing. Okay, we talk about all this national expansion. The Big Ten is moving to a national conference with their additions out on the West Coast. You look at what the Big 12 is doing. They're in 3 time zones right now. I think the only time zone that they're not in is the Pacific time zone right now. So a lot of these conferences that aren't the SEC are moving more national. With more national, obviously that's not regional, and obviously the travel becomes much more with some of these Olympic sports as well. So although I may agree with maybe what Trev is saying, that's moving in a completely opposite direction than where we're going right now. Are we going to tear down, stop what we're doing to do something like this? I don't think so. I think we're going to keep going in the direction that we're going, and I'll get to where maybe that end game could work out later on here in this segment. Yeah, do Olympic sports need to have that less travel? I firmly believe so. Like football, not a big deal. You fly out there, you play a Saturday game, you fly back. I've said this before, I'll say it again. It's not that big of a deal for football. For some of these other sports, it's a bigger deal, but for some of these other sports, they do travel a good amount. Now, not consistently. Yeah, you look at your volleyball, your basketball. Of course, a majority of that schedule is within conference, but they do put on some miles and they do travel, and they've done that for many, many years. So when you take a look at where things are going to go, here's something Trev Alberts can throw out an idea. Big Ten Ted can throw out an idea as well. Here's what I think is going to happen. I think the ACC eventually is going to come crumbling down. I think the SEC, the Big 10, and the Big 12 are going to take the parts of the ACC. And I think that's eventually what's going to happen. Now, you talk about football and you talk about the Olympic sports. How can they mesh together in this model, in this direction that we seem to kind of keep on going? The Big 10, the Big 12. I think that's where I want to start out with first. Now, football, like we said, we'll say it a million times. Football, travel, doesn't really matter. Okay, that's fine. They'll figure it out. But when it comes to the other sports, I think one thing that we maybe could do is shrink the conference schedule. Like the Big Ten plays a 20-game conference basketball schedule. I think we could maybe shrink that game down. Like, remember, 8 out of the 12 teams that were in the Pac-12 are now either in the Big Ten or the Big 12. They're split evenly 4-4. Why couldn't Oregon still play Arizona? Why couldn't USC still play Colorado, right? And you maybe have more when you get to the Olympic sports and maybe the sports that do a little bit more traveling more frequently. Maybe you could have more of those regional non-conference games and maybe less of the cross-country conference games. Sure, you're still going to travel to the East Coast, right? You're still maybe play Rutgers, you play Penn State, things like that. But instead of taking 2 trips out there, maybe you're only taking 1 trip out there. And you have some of these preseason tournaments, like you have teams travel to Maui for a early season basketball tournament. That's been going on for years. So maybe having the Big 10, the Big 12, and the SEC, and you look at the teams on the East, now instead of Rutgers and Maryland traveling out to the West Coast, maybe instead they could maybe play some of those ACC teams that were in that eventually would go to the Big 12, you know, your UCF, your North Carolina State, your Virginia Tech. You'd play more of those teams instead of traveling out west. Maybe just take that West Coast road trip maybe once a year or something like that. Go to the Pacific Northwest one year, the next year, you kind of go to Southern California. Okay, I want to say this as well. The NCAA is a useless organization. This whole Harbaugh thing has really proven that as well. And that's what I just said, and that's what I want to kind of connect these 2 points with. The Big 10, the Big 12, and the SEC, and maybe you throw in the Big East there for basketball, they could easily pull away from the NCAA, because what purpose does the NCAA really serve nowadays? Okay, it's these conferences and then the television networks within the conferences that really have a stranglehold over everything right now. I believe that's the way this is eventually going to go. I don't think you can leave out the Big 12 right now. Okay, a lot of people have said the Big 10 and the SEC. I don't think you can leave the Big 12 kind of stranded kind of over here. I think you got to kind of bring them along for the ride, and it's going to be that 60, 65, 70 teams, whatever it ends up being, are eventually going to maybe secede from the NCAA, form their own organization, and maybe work together in the Olympic sports to have better traveling logistics kind of going forward. Trev brings up some very interesting points here. He brings, and I appreciate his honesty. As I said at the top, we need more honesty from people in power instead of just this corporate speak. I love Trev really as an athletic director. I like what he has to say. I'm just not sure if it's going to go in the direction that he suggests, but I think there's bits and pieces of this that could really end up being building blocks kind of going forward. I want to hear what you guys think on that. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching Big Ten TED, where it's all Big Ten all year long. Make sure to like the video to spread the word of Big Ten TED to the masses, and subscribe to the channel for updates on Big Ten content that drops every day.